What happens when one of the most beloved icons in entertainment sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, only to face a barrage of disrespectful questions and condescending remarks from a host who clearly thinks he knows better? In just 44 seconds, a simple question about her latest project would spiral into one of the most shocking confrontations in television history, exposing the true character of a man who built his career on controversy. Cher had agreed to appear on the show to promote her new album, expecting the usual banter about her music, her career, maybe a few lighthearted questions about her personal life. She settled into the guest chair with her signature grace, that warm smile lighting up her face as she prepared for what she thought would be an enjoyable conversation. But from the very first question, something felt off. The host leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk, the one his regular viewers knew meant trouble was coming. "So Cher, you're what, pushing 80 now? Still trying to stay relevant in a young person's game?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful ribbing they were used to. This felt mean, spirited, personal. Cher's smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "Well, I'm actually 77, and I think my fans would disagree with you about relevance. Music doesn't have an expiration date. Come on, though. Don't you think there's something a little desperate about a woman your age still dressing like she's 20? I mean, the sequins, the revealing outfits. Isn't it time to, act your age?" The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several audience members gasped audibly. This wasn't edgy comedy or provocative interviewing. This was just cruel. Cher's posture straightened, her jaw setting in a way that anyone who knew her would recognize as a warning sign. "I dress the way I want to dress. I always have. That's called personal freedom, something you might want to look into." But the host wasn't done. If anything, her measured response seemed to embolden him. He leaned forward, that smirk widening into something uglier. "Personal freedom, sure. But don't you think you have a responsibility to your fans? I mean, you're a role model to a lot of women. What kind of message does it send when you're out there looking like you're trying to compete with your own daughter?" The question was so loaded with misogyny and ageism that even his usual supporters in the audience began to turn. You could feel the energy in the room shifting, the uncomfortable silence growing thicker with each passing second. Cher took a slow, deliberate breath. The message it sends is that women don't have to disappear when they reach a certain age. We don't have to become invisible to make other people comfortable. I've been performing for over 50 years, and I've earned the right to express myself however I choose. 50 years of what exactly? Let's be honest here. You had a few hits in the 70s, won an Oscar for playing yourself basically, and now you're coasting on nostalgia. When was the last time you actually did something culturally significant? The insult was so blatant, so dismissive of an entire legendary career, that the audience began to murmur their disapproval. But Cher didn't raise her voice. Instead, she spoke with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced down much worse than a petty talk show host having a bad night. "I think my Grammy, my Emmy, my Oscar, and my Golden Globe might disagree with your assessment. But more importantly, I think the millions of people who connect with my music and have found strength in my journey might have something to say about cultural significance." The host's face flushed red. He clearly hadn't expected such a composed, articulate response. His usual targets tended to get flustered, to give him the emotional outburst he could then mock and dismiss. But Cher was giving him nothing to work with except her own quiet strength and the growing disapproval of his audience. "Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. There comes a time when you need to step aside and let the next generation have their moment. You've had yours, multiple times, apparently. And who exactly gets to decide when that time comes? You, a talk show host who's built his career on tearing down people more successful than himself?" The comeback landed like a physical blow. The host's face went from red to purple, his carefully constructed persona beginning to crack under the pressure. This wasn't going according to script. He was supposed to be the clever one, the one with all the cutting remarks and witty observations. But here was Cher, calm and collected, turning his own weapons against him with surgical precision. "I've built my career on honest commentary, on saying what others are too polite to say. That's called journalism. No, that's called bullying. And there's a difference between honest commentary and personal attacks designed to humiliate your guests for entertainment." The words cut through the studio like a blade. Even the production crew, usually invisible behind their cameras and equipment, seemed to freeze in place. This wasn't the usual back and forth of a talk show interview. This was something much more real, much more raw. The host tried to regain control, to steer the conversation back to safer ground where he held the advantage. "You know what? Let's talk about your music then. This new album. It sounds exactly like everything else you've ever done. Same old Cher, same old sound. Don't you think your fans deserve something fresh? Something that shows you've actually grown as an artist? But Cher had heard enough. The patient mask she'd been wearing finally slipped, revealing the fire that had sustained her through decades in one of the most brutal industries in the world. You want to talk about growth? Let's talk about growth. I've survived 5 decades in an industry that chews up women and spits them out before they turn 30. I've reinvented myself more times than you've had original thoughts. And you're sitting here questioning whether I've grown as an artist? Her voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. The kind of strength that comes from years of fighting battles that smaller people couldn't even imagine. The host shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with this new dynamic, where he was no longer in control of the conversation. I'm just asking the questions my audience wants answered. Your audience? Or your ego? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're more interested in making yourself look clever than actually engaging with your guests. The studio audience was fully on her side now. You could hear scattered applause starting to build. People responding to someone finally standing up to the kind of interview tactics they'd grown tired of watching. But the host wasn't ready to back down. If anything, being challenged seemed to bring out the worst in him. You know what? Fine, let's get real then. Everyone knows your career has been built on spectacle rather than substance. The costumes, the drama, the constant reinvention you're so proud of. It's all just smoke and mirrors to distract from the fact that you're not actually that talented. The accusation hung in the air like a grenade with its pin pulled. Even for someone used to controversial statements, this crossed a line that left everyone in the room stunned. Cher stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been all evening. Not that talented. Interesting perspective from someone whose greatest achievement is having opinions about people who actually create things. I create plenty. I create conversation. I create debate. I create moments like this that people actually remember. You create nothing. You take the work that others pour their hearts and souls into, and you tear it down for cheap laughs. That's not creation. That's destruction. And it's easy. Anyone can destroy something. It takes no skill, no talent, no courage. The host's carefully constructed superiority was crumbling in real time. His usual tactics of interruption and dismissal weren't working against someone who refused to be rattled. Someone who had faced down much tougher crowds than a late-night television audience. Look, maybe we should move on to something else. Oh no, we're not moving on. You wanted to get real, so let's get real. You sit behind this desk every night making jokes about people who put themselves out there, who take risks, who create art that moves people. What do you create? What do you put into the world that makes it better? The question landed with devastating accuracy. The host looked around desperately, as if hoping his production team might cut to commercial, might save him from this moment where his entire professional persona was being dismantled piece by piece. I provide commentary on culture. I help people think critically about the entertainment they consume. You help people tear down women who don't conform to your narrow idea of how they should behave. You help people feel superior by mocking others instead of celebrating them. That's not cultural commentary. That's just mean. The audience erupted in applause, finally giving voice to what they'd been feeling since the interview began. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a reckoning. The host tried desperately to regain control of his own show. Okay, let's just calm down here. I think we're getting a little heated. I am calm. This is me being calm while you systematically try to humiliate me on national television. The problem isn't that I'm heated. The problem is that you thought this would be easy. You thought you could bring on an older woman and make jokes about her appearance and her relevance, and she'd just sit there and take it. That's not what I was doing. That's exactly what you were doing. And the reason you're uncomfortable now isn't because I'm being difficult. It's because I'm not playing along. I'm not giving you the reaction you wanted so you could feel clever and superior. The host was sweating now, visibly struggling to find his footing in a conversation that had completely escaped his control. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the desperate flailing of someone who had finally met his match. I respect your career. I really do. I was just trying to have an honest conversation about the challenges of aging in entertainment. No, you were trying to make me feel small so you could feel big. There's a difference between honest conversation and targeted cruelty. And if you can't see that difference, maybe you shouldn't be interviewing people at all. The words hit like a physical blow. Several people in the audience stood up and began clapping, their approval of Cher's stance unmistakable. The host looked around frantically, clearly hoping for support that wasn't coming. I think maybe we should take a break. We should take a break? From what? From you being disrespectful to your guests? Because I don't think a commercial is going to fix that problem. The host's face went through a series of expressions, confusion and anger, and something approaching panic, all flickering across his features, as he realized that this interview had become something he couldn't control or manipulate. You know what the real problem is here? You've gotten so used to people being afraid of you, so comfortable with your ability to intimidate guests, that you forgot some of us have been dealing with bullies a lot longer than you've been on television. The observation cut straight to the heart of the matter. The host had built his reputation on being the tough interviewer, the one who asked the hard questions that others wouldn't dare ask. But there was a difference between tough questions and personal attacks, and everyone in that studio could see it clearly now. I'm not trying to intimidate anyone. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to interview people, not to attack them. Your job is to create engaging television, not to make your guests feel worthless. If you think those are the same thing, then maybe you need to find a different job. The suggestion hung in the air with devastating finality. The audience was completely silent now, waiting to see how the host would respond to having his entire career called into question on his own show. He looked around desperately, searching for any ally in the room, but found only faces reflecting back his own discomfort. Look, maybe I came on a little strong tonight. It's been a long week, and sometimes the questions come out harsher than I intend. A little strong? You called me desperate. You dismissed my entire career. You suggested I was too old to be expressing myself the way I want to. That wasn't harsh questioning. That was personal degradation disguised as journalism. The host was completely deflated now, all of his usual bluster gone. This wasn't how these interviews were supposed to go. His guests were supposed to be grateful for the platform, willing to endure a little rough treatment in exchange for the exposure. But Cher had flipped the script entirely. Maybe we could start over. Ask you about the album properly. Start over? After spending 20 minutes trying to tear me down, you want to start over? Do you think that's how respect works? You can't just reset the conversation when you realize you've been cruel. The host's hands were shaking slightly now as he shuffled through his note cards, looking for some way to salvage what had become a complete disaster. His carefully crafted image as the sharp-witted interviewer was crumbling before a live audience and television cameras. I was trying to create good television. Good television doesn't require humiliating your guests. Good television comes from genuine conversation, from curiosity about the people sitting across from you, from treating them like human beings instead of targets for your jokes. The lecture was delivered with such calm authority that it felt more devastating than any shouting match could have been. The host was being schooled on his own show, in front of his own audience, by someone who understood the entertainment business better than he ever would. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I apologize. This got way out of hand. It got out of hand the moment you decided that my age and appearance were more interesting topics than my work. The moment you decided that I was here for you to mock instead of to share something meaningful with your viewers. The apology felt hollow in the face of such clear-eyed analysis. The host looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own behavior and by Cher's refusal to let him off the hook easily. I don't know what else to say. You could try saying nothing. You could try listening for a change instead of always looking for the next opportunity to make a joke or score a point. You could try treating your guests like the accomplished people they are, instead of like obstacles to your comedy. The suggestion was offered without malice, but it landed with the force of truth. Everyone watching could see that this wasn't just about one bad interview. This was about a pattern of behavior, a way of conducting interviews that prioritized spectacle over substance. I think maybe we should wrap this up. We should wrap it up because you're uncomfortable, not because we've accomplished anything meaningful here. You brought me on to talk about my music, and instead you spent the entire time trying to make me feel bad about myself. That's not an interview. That's just sad. The final assessment was delivered with such matter-of-fact clarity that it felt like a closing argument in a trial. The host had no response, no comeback, no clever retort. He simply sat there, diminished and exposed, while Cher gathered her composure and prepared to leave. Thank you for having me on your show. I hope your future guests get the respect they deserve. With that, she stood up from her chair with the same grace she had shown when she arrived, removing her microphone and walking off the set, while the audience erupted in sustained applause. The host sat frozen in his chair, watching his own show dissolve into chaos as people continued clapping for someone who had just demonstrated what real strength looked like. The cameras kept rolling for another few seconds, capturing the host's stunned expression as he realized that his attempt to dominate an interview had instead revealed his own limitations. The show that was supposed to showcase his wit and insight had instead become a masterclass in dignity under pressure, taught by someone who understood that true power comes not from tearing others down, but from refusing to be torn down yourself. The credits rolled over the sound of continued applause, marking the end of what would be remembered not as a successful interview, but as the night a legendary performer reminded everyone what grace under fire actually looks like.